I tell you about everything in the world and on the world and above the world and about the world, as well as around the world and through the world and in the world and near the world. I tell you about the winds and the weathers and the oceans and the lands and the continents that have risen and sunk since this little hunk of dirt first whirled off the burning sun. I tell you the men and the women that bathed their eyes in the zigzag lightning and hugged and kissed in the rumbling thunder, and about every Union wheel that ever did run down a Union road or down a Union rail, and every puff of Union smoke that ever did rise up out of a big, high Union smokestack.
There's a better world that's a comin', tell you why. There's a better world that's a comin', tell you why. We will beat 'em on the land, on the sea, and in the sky. There's a better world that's a comin', tell you why.
All right, Paul. So what's the topic for today?
What's on the itinerary today, Paul? Today is
Yeah.
April 29th, 2020.
What was the big happening over the last couple of days, Sweet Paul?
Yes. Last couple days we saw North Korea quite a bit in the news. Kim Jong Un and Kim. Yeah. And what else have we seen? We've seen more disaster in the Democratic National Convention. And for today's episode, we're also going to include a segment on the grift left, which has been plaguing the left-wing politics sphere of the West for quite a bit now.
Oh no, not the grift left. Oh, I don't know. I guess we should address them, but first, I think the most pertinent thing is the opinions within the left on like authoritarian regimes, quote unquote.
Yeah, be careful with
like,
saying we have already got so many on there.
Yeah, I mean, like quote unquote, like what, quote unquote. That's what some perceive it as, and what some others don't perceive it as. But I mean, hopefully, we can have as much of a nuanced take about what's going on. So, Gabe, you want to start us off with this?
I mean, where to begin with this? Yeah, so I guess probably the biggest news to come out of this week, obviously, in our little corner of the internet, is definitely the. Do we have an update? Like, is he dead or just brain dead? I think the latest update is that he's just brain dead, right?
Well, there's conflicting. Like, those sources were really sketchy at best. Like, a news media said this, and you go down the source, and then this news media said this, and this one, and it all came from this weird, like, website. Like, one was like Liberty something, not Liberty Hangout, but something else. Then it was for Taiwanese news, because why not? Then Japanese and all that stuff. But South Korea officially stated that there is no evidence of him being dead or brain dead or even that sick or like being close to death. So it's just a lot. It is that example of like, if you repeat it, people start believing he's just dead. It reminds me of those stories of someone like, like someone went on a trip and didn't tell anyone. It's like, oh, where did he go? And like, is he dead? And then someone else says, oh, I heard he's dead. And then everyone starts repeating, it's like, oh, he's dead. And then to the point where they just write his obituary in the newspaper. And then he comes back, it's like, bro, that's me.
I mean, modern journalism pretty much is just one major telephone game. Like, it's
like
somebody just has to fucking whisper it in like an important office in the country, and then it just spreads.
Yeah, and yeah, it's the race, the first one to get the news article out. So if you're the first one, they're the first one to be clicked. So if there's not a lot of gates to like fact checked or anything, so there will be a lot of confusion. That's why we always get these conflicting reports. That's why it's always best just to wait for a bit. even with North Korea, it usually does take a couple days for them to announce a leader's death or something. But it's been long enough since the time of recording of this episode that he's probably still alive or something.
I mean, when Il passed, I remember it felt like a month before there was any sort of like actual confirmation.
I thought it was like 3 days or something like that, but I may be
To get
wrong.
like the
I don't
actual
know.
story though, like the actual story still continued, like what had happened and how it had happened. It felt like a month. It could have been like, it could have just been like me and kind of like what was going on, but it felt like stories were constantly changing about how it had happened or what it had happened or whatever. But
But
I
yeah.
mean, I don't know. It's we got on the left lovers and despisers of a certain ideology. So Paul, you want to start us off with the lovers and the despisers?
Of the Juche?
Yeah.
Yes. For anyone that do not know, Juche is the main, say, ideology and system of thoughts when running North Korea. It's the idea that self-reliance is the purest way to protect yourself from imperialism, like mainly the U.S. or the Western world. That's why they're very closed off with imports, trade, tourism, just anything. That's why they're very small, but they still need. But due to lack of aid, when the fall of the USSR and China's lack of cooperation with them, sometimes they had to open up some things. So that's why you actually can take a tourist route through North Korea now.
Yeah, they've done a lot in the recent 10 to 20 years to really improve their the outward appearance that they have, specifically in the capital. There's a lot of like touristy things that you can look at and do while you're there for like when they have reporters come in. So they've tried to improve their outward appearance a lot over the last 10 to 20 years. Now, whether or not that outward appearance translates into improved material conditions for the rest of the people, we like don't know really, outside of whatever news they like to push out. But yeah, no, they've definitely done a lot to improve that look.
Oh yeah, it's very interesting going to North Korea. It's actually like I think they have like the biggest hotel in the world. I'm actually not sure if it's open. I don't think it's open. I remember seeing a documentary on this. It's that big spire, pyramid type hotel in the middle, and it was being funded by the USSR because they're also trying to open up. But then the USSR fell. They ran out of funding. I think they might have opened up recently. No, I think they finished construction, but it's not filled with anything. Like there's lights can turn on, there's TV and all that stuff, but it's none of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm looking at a picture of it. It's wild. That's actually insanely cool architecture.
Yeah, it's meant to bring in people because one of the main things that North Korea needs is Western money. Western, like, they need physical cash because they can't actually get physical cash because usually countries will work with a bank to get more currency of a different country, but they can't because it's sanctioned all places. So they actually are working on things like tourism. They're working on things like international trade. Even can find like advertisements in like soccer games in England. I see where like they have their soccer teams that come out, and even when the teams are not out, there's like still advertisements of visiting North Korea. I remember seeing one of those ads go viral. It's like, what's this doing here? But yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a little bit surreal, right? Like, being in the West, you basically only get very limited information about North Korea. It tends to get ignored until like he makes the news, or they make the news in some very dramatic fashion. And then the source of news that you usually get concerning North Korea is usually very limited in scope. It's almost always negative. It never talks about the actual material conditions of in North Korea. It always focuses on the negative, so you never really hear the full story from Western outlets. So it is always interesting to see, like you said, like these little advertisements or little peeps of North Korea that expresses itself in other avenues.
I mean,
Always capitalistic avenues, ironically
we
too.
we see this with like since the fall of the USSR. Like previous generations were brought up to think that everything over there was just like this brutalist, like brick on brick type shit, and nobody there had fun. They just like scrounged for like food pieces and shit off like the tables of the leaders and shit like that. And then like 30, 40 years later, we have some media release that was saved in the archives, and it's like everybody's just kind of like living and existing and doing their own thing. They had like culture that kind of mimicked like Western culture, which they had like 80s synth pop and shit like that. And so these people's lives aren't just like for the wealth of the state and shit like that. Like they all live their own like individual piece in history and stuff. And
Yeah.
the West would like you to think that it's like
that it's just like this
lacking
crazy
because-
autonomous state that the people are literally just solely exist for the benefit of the state, right? Like
Yeah.
that is that. I mean, that like even just from like a logical standpoint, that's obviously just not possible. Like you would have to. I mean, that's what they want you to believe. At least I just don't think that's logically possible.
Well, you have to worship the American abomination, which I think is America's. We should just start calling America's ideology, which is that you believe in like free will, which since like maybe like the 18th, 19th century philosophers have even been like saying like no, that's just like fucking Christian like hangover. So you'd have to believe in some certain like autonomy that all people have, where there's some like universal goal for everybody that like if you work for the state then your life is meaningless or whatever, and then if you work for yourself and like do things on your own, then your life has full meaning, which is just like a linchpin in the American ideology. So
By the way, discuss like there is like some troubles with the North Korea. Still, one of the main things is through the a lot of the means came from this, but like North Korea is not a a breadbasket as a sea. It's north. It's cold. It's all that stuff. It's not a lot of places where you can grow food. There's not there's still stuff, and that's one of the main arguments against Juche. It's very closing. You do get a lot less influence from outside states, but in situations like these, you're very still needing outside sources. That's why like some places that like you just need food in general. So that's why some things require trade or
Yeah, no, that's just like I know that I'm just gonna use the E word, but like that's basic economics. Is that when you close yourself off as a country from the rest of the world, you are definitely going to lose access to things that you would otherwise have if you were open. You had some kind of version of open markets, whether they be state controlled or not.
Yeah, and like it's like a better form is like autark. It's just self-reliance. But those require like really well thought development of certain industries. And Cuba has been working well in autark as well. It's like they still they grow their own food. After the fall of USSR, they had to double down on this. They have to rely on stuff like there's still old cars from like the '60s and all that stuff. But they replace the engines. They just keep all that stuff, and like they rely on their own development of medicine and doctors and all that stuff. And I also find ironic is that like Cuba is very close to the United States, not exact but close to the United States in form of healthcare, which you have to think one is the richest nation in the world that has many land and many resources versus this one country that's sanctioned and blocked off by a large portion of the world.
That's literally a little tiny fucking island, by the way, too. Like,
Yeah.
it's this little tiny blip on the map compared to the giant Western nations. And you were talking healthcare outcomes, right? I'm assuming that's what you're referring
healthcare
to.
outcomes. Yeah, like it's what is it?
Like their healthcare's efficiency.
Yeah, healthcare efficiency. Because like a lot of places, it's very hard to get to. It's very hilly, very foresty in a lot of areas. They have committed to building hospitals in far out-reaching places. I remember watching this one speech by this one American communist. He's well known. I forget his name. But he explains that when going to Cuba, that's the people are glad for the revolution that happened there because some places didn't have doctors. It took weeks just to get to the doctors because they had to go to the nearest city and track on foot. It takes like 20 people just to carry the guy or a girl or something just through the forest, the hills, the mountains, and all that stuff. But after development of their own infrastructure, their own wealth of economy, the focus on themselves, it has developed the nation better. Because that's the reason for the TARC is a lot of it has to focus on resource management. And one of the parts of that speech that he was talking about was the resources. Taking out of third world countries, bringing back in first world countries, and the people working there get the minimum while we get basically the profit. You know, the people have called this the theft, of third world wealth sort of thing. That's why.
Well, yeah, that's like well, for one, it's like brain drain, and then kind of like the folly of centralized capital too. Is that like those hospitals would not have been built in rural areas if it was up to like capitalists, because when it comes to like capitalist structures, you have to come to where the capital is. The capital is not going to follow you. You have to come to where the capital is. So
yeah,
and that's kind of like.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's a good point. That's exactly what I was going to say. Is that like the only reason that this kind of infrastructure even exists is because it was designated by the state. Like if it was a quote unquote free market, freewheeling economy, those rural, hospitals never years would be built. It would be an afterthought. And of course, you can see evidence of this in the United States, where news story after news story of rural hospitals being closed or underfunded or staff costs being cut. I mean, you see it everywhere in rural America where pre-existing hospitals are being cut because they're not profitable. Like, there's no reason for capital to maintain and upkeep those hospitals if it's not making them any money. So as a result, you get hospital closures, and then the medical deserts where you have people that live in areas where they have to drive hours for a hospital, which I mean in some cases can prove to be fatal. So yeah, these are all really good things that come out of an authoritarian style of government where you have full control over where resources go. That being said, we've done a lot of talking good about authoritarian governments and Juche gang and whatnot, but authoritarianism is very much a double-edged sword. Yeah, I don't know. Do you guys want to touch on the negatives a little bit of authoritarianism and Juche gang in North Korea?
Yeah, and it's that that one argument of usual, just like the power structure usually goes to, because usually you can get one good guy. This is the same problem with sort of like a monarch. It's like you can get one good guy, but you don't have control of the next guy to come in, and that one could be influenced by other factors of who could be chosen, and all of a sudden you get like slightly worse and worse. We did get the fall of the Soviet Union after all because of that sort of thing. Like, And that's just the system power, and that's why I think it's better power structure to go wide than tall, sort of thing. It's um, not anarchy or anarcho-communism, but a more council-like um, form of structure. It tried to decentralize something, but still have a somewhat centralized structure. Like there still be like a central government, but there be playing strengths within like something like within its own region, then to its own town, to its own individual sort of thing. Like
Right. I mean, that's the,
one of Marx's like famous quotes when being argued, like, oh, there's 40 million people in Germany. How if you're to make a government that will go into social a lower phase communism than a higher phase communism, how many people do you expect to be in the government? 40 million, as jokingly said, and he says, yes, there'd be 40 million people in the government. It's the idea of the form of state sort of thing. It's like who has the power sort of thing, and like and that's when it gets into like a little frisky depending on who you are, because some people have different definitions of states. One of the more common anarchist definitions, like the monopoly on violence. Marx is originally from Marx. Their definition is the monopoly on class, so the control of the power and where it goes, and that's where it divides in the argument, splinters, sort of thing.
I mean, if you wanted to really get at it with like a surgical knife, then you could also start to kind of psychoanalyze it, because you could also look at it from like Nietzschean drives, like these people in government, like what are they prone to reflexively do? Like what is the drive, the will that like wins out over all the other drives? Is it coming from like a proper like base in like like moral understanding, or is it just because they're kind of like shooting from the hip, which was, I think, a lot of people's problem with Stalin, and his implementation was essentially like, this shit can't wait. Like we need brute force, and now, and we need enforcement, and now, and Lenin's was like a bit more fleshed out and like put together, and there was more strategic planning within it, and so that's also definitely where people start to divide as well too. So
well, no, that's good though that you bring that up, because like that phenomena is not unique to authoritarianism at all, right? Like even in a very much fractured system, like a democratic system, or like what you have in the United States, where you have different levels of office and then different people holding those offices, like it's always going to be, well, never say always or never say never, but for the most part people are going to want to maintain their power and then do whatever it is that they need to do to maintain that power, right? But the downside in an authoritarian system is that means that all that power, and thus the person, is in one person's hand, and then that one person is going to do everything that they can to hold that power. Whereas in a more democratic or fractured system where the power is split up, if you have one person trying to do that, it has hypothetically less of an impact on the entire system than if it was all the power was in one person's hand. So that is an important point to make, of just like, which is my view, is what Paul said in the beginning. My entire view on authoritarianism is basically that an authoritarian government can lead to the literal best possible outcomes if you have the perfect person in power with all the power. It can also lead to the worst possible outcome. So it is the most varied, dynamic version of government. And to me, that's just not very smart way to do it. I can't. I don't know. I don't think I could be convinced either that it's the right way to handle things. Now, there is an argument to be made that a lot of authoritarian types like to say that I actually do kind of agree with, which is that in a world that is ruled by capitalist interests, and that is a world that is predominantly capitalistic, and you are a left-leaning authoritarian nation, well, the only way to have a left-leaning nation in this world is to be authoritarian and to have that strong arm against the capitalist system. And to that, I do say that history has shown that so far, that is the only way to go about it, because otherwise you are going to be prodded and poked by the capitalist system and other Western nations at large. And so I guess they're right on that front. I don't know. Do you guys agree with that? Or
Well, I mean, in the development of moving from a system of, let's say, like monarchy or some hegemonic body like exists within the state, and then there's like a revolution. Most of the time, who's going to want to get in on that action? Most of the time, we see it's going to be like the fucking capitalist countries that see some sort of like devolution in their eyes and a way to kind of like profit from that, and to spread their power and their hold over power to other like countries, because to them they see that as like a country that just devolved into a state of like, which you can put under a quote unquote developing country. So for them it's like, okay, let's assess like the resources or whatever. So for there to be an ability to push back on that, yeah, you're going to need some sort of like brute force and some sort of like strength, which is where a lot of like of the left, what other term is there to use except like the ones that are very, very, very like they emphasize the force that you have to use. Who are those of the left that emphasize that force? It would be Marxist-Leninists. And under their interpretation, yeah, I'm going to say, under their interpretation, like you need to have that force there. You need to have some sort of vanguard. You need to have some sort of like body of people that are going to be there to protect that like community or whatever, what have you, so that like other forces don't come in and like fuck up the works, you know.
Which
what I
to
mean?
me logically follows, by the way. Again, like I'm looking at this pragmatically, like that is the argument that they put forward, and I say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you can draw another parallel to recent events in what happened in the Labour Party in the UK. A lot of people say that if Corbyn had just purged the party, so to speak, not violently, of course, like the MLs would probably suggest, but if they just purged the party of all the kind of like Blairite individuals, then you would have had a Labour Party that was like significantly stronger as a whole and significantly more unified for the last elections here in December, and the outcome might have been different. Because a lot of people blame the Labour Party's loss in December to their very like middle of the road trying to straddle both sides opinion on Brexit, which was definitely like the biggest issue in that election. So again, that logic follows there too, right? It makes sense to me. But where the problem lays, and I know it lays with you too, Brandon, because we talked about this before, is that the ends do not justify the means. I think that's what separates myself and you to other people who are more hell-bent on making authoritarianism work in this particular instance.
I mean, the big thing too is that, are we just looking at it from like different contexts? Because for them, a sort of like party system would still be in effect, like it would still exist. And if there has to be a party system, then how are we going to control it? How are we going to handle it? How are things going to be? And so under that assumption and within that context, the Marxist-Leninists kind of like wins out above all, because it's still assuming that there's states and there's still nations. And in our current like conditions, there are states and there are nations and there are countries and there are provinces and there are governing bodies and there are borders separating everybody. So in that context, yeah, it makes sense that the only way to get to where you want to be would be to challenge the states. And what do the states kind of have control over? Well, they have control over the force of the state. And so like when they come down on the citizens, they're going to have to, any sort of revolutionary is going to have to contend with like, oh, am I going to like do things peacefully? No, of course you're not. You're not going to do things peacefully. And so if the states and governing bodies are going to exist, the Marxist-Leninists went out. So in that way, their ideology makes so much sense and is perfectly sensible in that context. What an anarchist would argue is that like we shouldn't be wanting that to happen, but that's not the domain that we currently occupy. We don't have a non-body, like us in particular, not those autonomous nations in other countries, but us in particular. Our condition right now is that we're under a state rule. We have federal government, we have fucking CIA, we have the FBI, we have police force, like we have all these like militarized positions that derive themselves from a military force. How are you going to handle and contend with these things? You're going to have to like reply with force in itself.
Well,
like,
I don't know about that.
The time for optics is not in a time of like we need to like do something about the state.
I mean,
the time for optics wouldn't really wouldn't really be the time to like be like, oh, let's play nice.
I mean, okay, if you're talking strictly philosophically, then sure. I mean, I can maybe see that, but like realistically, it's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. I think in the it was either the first episode or the second episode, I talked about how nothing is going to fundamentally change until material conditions get worse. Well, not only would we have to get to that point to even see change or enough unrest to see change electorally, you're talking about moving even further beyond that point to get to the point that you're talking about right now.
Well, yeah, this is all hypothetical. I mean, I'm not saying like, I'm saying that if it gets to that point, how are you going to change things? You're not going to change things through peaceful assembly or some bullshit. You're going to change things by getting like as radical as the force you're going to have to exert. Like, that's just what's going to have to happen if you're going up against the state. If you're going up against like different types of bodies, then yeah, like, and it's not a state that has control over like a force such as like the military or the police force. Like, if it doesn't have control over that, then shit tons of violence doesn't really need to happen. It might happen, but it doesn't really need to happen. But that's what I'm saying. In the hypotheticals, the hypothetical that Marxist-Leninists operate under is kind of like a more realized reality right now than I think what a lot of leftists want to like, other leftists want to like contend with. Because if you're operating under like an assumption that we can peacefully break down institutions that are unnecessary or that we view as unnecessary, then you're going to have to struggle with the fact that capitalist ventures rely on these institutions to exist, to apply force to us to keep us in line. There's almost no way you'd be able to peacefully break down some of these institutions. And there's none that I can really like think of. If you want to break down, like, you can continue pumping the airwaves with like information and data. We all know and have absorbed this data. That's why we're here where we are right now. But the like majority of people don't see it like that, and they don't like absorb the data like that. Instead, like, the things that they listen to and they study, if you can even call it study, which is literally just like sitting in front of a TV and just having like the talking heads just blast information at them, the way that they see it is that these institutions are necessary, and anybody that wants to break them down are radicals and irrelevant. And that's the point, is that we see where these issues are coming from, and they're coming from these institutions. But there's no way you're going to be able to kind of like argue out years and years of indoctrination out of people. And like you said, it's going to have to get to a certain point for things to change. But at that point, when it gets to that point, the biggest thing I think a lot of leftists are going to have to contend with is like, how violent are you willing to get?
Well, okay. So let's assume everything that you just said is like 100% true, and that the only, I guess, and that the only way to see significant change for the working class is a Marxist-Leninist route that requires violence. How far along down the road, and I'm putting you on the spot here, I realize, how far down the road do you think we need to be, both in time and years from now, and then in material conditions? Like, what do they look like for that, something like, for enough people to get to that point where something like that can happen?
It might need to be like a fundamental sea change in like people's opinions on certain institutions. So we still have like people that absolutely worship the police, and we still have people that like just can't stand the police. But there's that middle that still wins out, which is that they don't see a problem with the institution.
Right,
They
because
just
but that's
see
my
bad
point.
actors.
That's my point, though, is like, this is my problem with MLs and like revolutionaries in general, is like, the conditions that you're talking about that you need to get to that point is not realistic. That's my argument, is that you are expecting, or you're acknowledging that you need this giant force of people that are willing to commit like violent acts potentially, but the conditions in which you can actually garner such a army of people need to be so bad that they're willing to get to that level. But you're saying is that, okay, yeah, we have this gigantic, like, what do you think, like 40 to 60% of the population are probably like apolitical for the most part, something like that, or they don't hold views strongly one way or another enough to get to like an ML standpoint on one side or another, and a militant standpoint.
Yeah.
So like that's my thing. That's my problem. That's my entire problem with this idea of thinking, is that like, when is it going to happen, and like, how is it going to happen? Like, you can philosophize about all this stuff as much as you want. Like, just realistically, it's just not going to happen, is my point. And that's why I say, like, it's a really kind of like a moot position to hold.
I mean, the contention's always going to be there. I'm just saying that if I'm looking at it from their perspective, that's how things are going to be. Do I personally agree with all the things that they say? No, but out of all things that they say, yeah, CILL your landlord, dude.
I mean, it's like not. I don't even disagree with that sentiment necessarily. Like, I really don't. Like, it's like, but again, like, you're not ever gonna get to the point where even like it's never gonna happen. It's never ever gonna happen. And I think that's what pisses me off the most about this little section of the internet, which is like, we can transition into like the grifter stage here, is that a lot of these people that call themselves, like, it's one thing to have the philosophical mindset that we've discussed, and saying like, yes, it is my belief that the only way to enact this kind of change is through this kind of very militant action with the force against the state, right? Like, it's one thing to have that philosophical outlook. It's another thing to effectively LARP on the internet or within your group of friends or whatever, and spew all this kind of like very violent or inflammatory, abrasive rhetoric out into the world, and then just like assume that everybody's gonna like look at you as serious or take you seriously. Like, that's the part that pisses me off the most. It's so fake. It's just so fucking fake. Like, I don't know.
You're not necessarily wrong, but I don't think we want the spooks to get on our ass too much. So maybe we should hang it up there and then move into like what we're going to talk about next. Because if we head any more into spicy territory, I don't know, man.
Yeah, I know. I understand. I understand. Again, like
But-
I agree. Like I don't logically the logic follows within the ML philosophy. I get it. I understand it, and to an extent, I agree with it because again, look at what happened. Like even on the logic follows even on an electoral level with the Labor Party. I 100% agree with that. If they had just purged that party full of people of Blairites, then that the politics in the UK might look a lot different. So I agree with the line of thinking. The problem is that a lot of these people and this line of thought, they don't operate in reality, and that's the problem that I have. But yeah, along the frame of LARPers and being too online, I mean that is the name of this podcast. Let's talk grifters in general, not even just leftist grifters, but grifters in general.
Yeah.
One of the things that actually happened today and yesterday, this is kind of like an easy, low-hanging fruit, but Elon Musk was on Twitter again, saying dumbass shit like he usually does. But he was talking about, I think it was like a week ago now, Trump sent out those tweets saying to like liberate Vermont and like Virginia and Ohio. I don't remember the states, but he was basically saying that they need to liberate themselves. And Elon Musk copied him and said that America must be liberated, of course, referring to him wanting to open up the economy again. We must feed the blood god so that they can continue to make money. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah. Remember, blood to the blood gods,
Yep.
bones to the bone throne.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What was it? What was it? Elon is that. Yeah. What is it? A lot of his marketing relies on his appearance. When he just sends out one bad tweet, his markets just fall in a second, sort of thing. And so, like, he is very much grifting to like almost all sides, sort of thing, especially on the internet, Reddit sort of community, which where he picks up a lot of his fandom, sort of thing.
Yeah, if you're ever feeling optimistic and you think you're feeling a little bit too optimistic and you kind of want to let yourself down again, just go to one of Elon Musk's tweets and then just go to the replies. I mean, you'll lose faith in humanity in like half a second flat, man. It's so bad. Like anytime that you see some kind of positive change in your mentality of how the world's going, just go there real quick. It'll set you real fast back to reality. The amount of just absolutely brain dead, brain worm filled fans that he has is absolutely unreal. It just reminds you of the depravity of human nature in the sense of that so many people are so willing to just follow the leader without critically thinking about certain things. It's absolutely wild.
Yeah.
But it also acknowledging that and dealing with that, it makes his tweets even more scary, that people like him have the amount of following that they do, and thus the power that they do with their words. So this kind of like thinly veiled, you know I don't know what else do you call like reopening up the economy other than like just an absolute like disdain or uncaring amount for like human life. I mean, or you're just not thinking about it fully. I don't know what
Was it?
like. I mean, that is what it is, right?
Well, yeah. A lot of it with he has a very big ego. That it can be easily seen. He gets into arguments and then just like locks his Twitter or something. Well, not just lock, but like gets away from his Twitter every time he gets like called out very easily. Like a couple times he got called out for stealing art, not giving out to the artist. Well, not stealing, not stealing, but like posting and someone asks like, "Can you please put on the who did this?" And it's like you can search it, and he's like, "But better."
Yeah, I remember that.
Then he gets into his whole argument and just like leaves for a while. So he has a very big ego. The only way that I can the only way I can accept Elon Musk if he somehow gets us off this rock and like gets into third world civilization. No, what is it? The third part of civilization? I forget what's the name. But I mean, like just that. But then that's like a long shot. But I don't care.
I mean, but when he does that, it's not going to be for the express like
For the humanities or things.
interest for humanity. It's going to be for exactly. It's going to be for profit. It's going to be for him, his own ego, his company, and it's not going to really net anybody else much gain except him and his shareholders. So
Right, which is
really
cool, right? Like it's expected. Like that's like he's a egomaniac with a little bit of sociopathy, right? Like that's cool and good for him. The problem is that he has this like weird cultish following that hangs on every single word, and like I said, is kind of like a reflection of society as a whole, unfortunately, of how they just blindly follow him and agree with everything he says and does, like he's like the word of God. That to me is like the bigger problem here, not one man's egotistical ranting, but rather the impact that he has with these rants because of the following that he has.
This could be something that we can take up against like the Yang people, because he kind of like legitimized that whole ethos on stage, which was that like the end all be all is like fucking STEM. And if you're not in fucking STEM, you're fucking stupid. So, like, this
which
whole
ironically
thing with,
is the opposite for anything to do with politics, right? Like I mean, you need the humanities to govern.
well, the humanities seem to be the only like area in academia that's actually challenging and in not in neoliberal way, which is like, oh, math, like minorities can't do math, so let's change it in some way because we're fucking shithead neolibs and need to in some way in our field appease the lib gods. So we're gonna change how we do like math or some shit. And it's not like that. The humanities seem to be the only people challenging like the structure, and that's not profitable because it's challenging the structure. And it's unfortunate, but they are under these circumstances probably going to be the first ones to be gutted. So
yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit depressing talking about some of these things because, again, I would love to be wrong on a lot of this stuff, but unfortunately, it just seems that I don't know. You're right, and I agree with you. And the outcome of that being correct is just disaster, right? Like our education system has been gutted for a long time, and if they continue to gut it, then you're going to have less and less people, like you said, have the means to be able to think critically enough to challenge the system in varying forms. It doesn't just come in the form of philosophy or sociological thinking. It comes in other forms as well, history and such. But I mean, that's just I don't know. It's like a never-ending spiral down to the bottom of the barrel, right? Like
yeah, I mean, this is the American abomination where like one ideological tenet is just that if it's profitable, it's good, and if it's good, it's profitable. It's never ending. And so there are even STEM fields where it doesn't net a whole lot of money, and people are just saying like, "Oh, then it's a fucking worthless field. Then what are you doing? What are you doing in there? You could have chosen something that was going to make you money, and instead you chose some stupid like, I don't know, bioengineering. What an idiot!"
Learn the code.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's rough to think about for sure. But yeah, back to grifters and Musk and such. Are there any other prominent grifters that you guys want to talk about, or just want to keep it to the Elon Musk thing?
I'm not gonna name names, but there's definitely an issue on the left, and especially on the. I don't know if I can even say it's like it should be a major issue, but it is kind of weird to like hear from people previous to Bernie dropping out running with, like I said, I think a little back, I forgot what episode, but I said that they're running with the label of calling themselves a leftist, and then the minute that Bernie drops out, it's like, oh, what other things do we have except to like vote for Biden? So
Right.
Then they're like getting their essentially their audience to kind of like warp into that perspective. And there were some that came in like already thinking that and knowing that that's what they were going to do, because for them the whole point is that they still have like politics as a sport hangover. So for them it's like it's like any sort of argument that they can use and just waste oxygen on trying to rationalize voting for Biden, they're going to do. And it's really annoying. And these people make like a pretty penny essentially warping the opinions of what the left is and what the left stands for. And it's pretty shitty. And you kind of just want to call them like what they are, which is a lib and at most a rad lib. But they're never going to cop to that. And the audience is always going to kind of, the kind of people that look to them for guidance are probably the same people that put forth like that a leader is what you need and not a sort of like ethos or philosophy. Because if a leader is what you're aiming towards or what you're going for, then you're going to forget all the inhumane shit that a leader will do if they kind of like brought about some change that you agree with. And that happens all the time in politics. And that's the point, is that most leftists follow an ethos, they follow a philosophy. They follow, like, in some regards, an ideology. They don't follow a person, because that person is going to fuck up. You need to kill your heroes, but for many of these people, they need a hero, because if they don't have somebody to die for, then they're going to feel like they failed something in some way. It's such a weird, like, phenomenon, but we have to admit that it happens. And when it comes to, like, grift left types, it's happening in spades in their audience.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, Jeff. Do you guys know who Jeff Weaver is?
Give me a second.
He was one of the Sanders campaign's. I don't know if he was a communications director. Yeah, I think he was one of the communications director. He was one of the higher ups in the campaign. But he just recently, I think 2 days ago, opened up his own super PAC that was looking to help, I think, Biden win, I guess. I don't know if it was directly Biden, but it was like, yeah, I think it was actually. I'm pretty sure that's what the headline was. So yeah, he was another one, I guess, that you could put under that label that you were talking about.
Oh yeah, and
of making this heel turn while still co-opting the language of the Sanders campaign.
Yeah, what was it? Yeah, and this level of grifting goes at all levels. We got, as you mentioned, big people that work on the campaign to small time YouTubers, and that I feel don't, well, influencers, YouTubers, whatever, don't actually, what was it? They're looking for a bigger audience, sort of thing, always going bigger, and not actually follow what they say, or not even just follow what they say, just like know what they say, sort of thing. Because that's one of my main complaints of grifting online, is that, especially the left, I mean, we have this on the left as well, way more common than people think, is that people will say things that are just buzzwords. They heard that word, people are into it, they just say it, and then we'll try to find some connection to it, and then that's it on the subject. Well,
I don't want to name names, but there's a perfect example of that happening. And I'll name this one name. It was in a debate with Destiny, and Destiny fucking asked this other guy. I shouldn't have even said. Yeah, I mean, asked him about like what his system would be, and as an alternative to what we currently live under, and his catch-all was just communes, but couldn't like parse out what that meant. How do you get to them? What would that entail? Like, just embarrassing stuff.
Yeah.
And this person stylizes himself as like a dirtbag, like leftist or whatever. And yet they were one of the first ones to come out and like say like, what other choice do we have but to vote for Biden now? We have to accept that. And you don't have to fucking accept that.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Sweetball.
And that's one of the problems, that we allow this to happen. Like thousands.
Wait, who is we though? Specify who is we? We allow this to happen.
Well, the people, sort of thing. Like, this is the example of, like, just media circus, people following it. Like, if no one watch it, they will get no power, but then, like, we will know. Well, when we say we, like, us specifically, not really. Well, what was it? They see the other people as grifters, but they don't see their main hero as a grifter and all that stuff. I had an argument with the Vosh viewer and all that stuff, and they couldn't think of an argument of how, like, even for defending Biden's vote, like, what was it?
Might have to cut that out. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, yeah,
I think it's fine.
it's probably obvious by now, but
Yeah, it's the, what was it? And then, you know, it's just like people don't take themselves seriously, sort of thing, and that's why I see a lot of problems. Like, oh, I just listen to this because I listen to this, but like, people need to put their own standards on themselves, almost, like, not just the people making content, but just people watching the content, because a lot of people just watch it just because they're bored or whatever, that, or think it's good because there's nothing else. Like, people need to put a standard on themselves at this point.
I maybe I'm just become way too nihilistic, because when I hear you guys talking about all this stuff, I mean, you already said, like, the solution is for people to be more critical of these things. Well, if the people were capable of being more critical about these things, I don't think we would be in this situation of talking about grifters in general. I don't think grifters would exist in the form that they do if
yeah, but
people as a whole were more.
your base assumption, sorry to cut you off, but the base assumption is that the people that pay attention to these things are just like the electorate, where they don't care if they're fully educated. They kind of want somebody to synthesize it for them and then regurgitate it into their mouth. I would suspect that most of those that care about these people that we call the grift left actually want to know, like, more about the left from them, and that's why they are guided to them. But because it's a lot easier to synthesize some guy behind a screen, like, screaming into his webcam, than, like, actually sitting down and reading, like, a book or theory or whatever, and then theory into praxis and practicing that, they're going to naturally gravitate towards these types. So these types are good to call out, but their audience is definitely different in agency, I would say. Like, although we can argue what is agency, but in this context, I think we can say that there's at least some sort of agency for these, like, audience members to want to know more about the left. But for them, it kind of seems like they're trying to adopt, like, an alt-right, like, right-wing online kind of, like, thing where it's like facts, like, and like logic kind of, like, debate type shit, which is just, you don't need that. You can operate within your own sphere, and you don't need to, like, have debates with people like fucking Destiny and shit for your interpretation of things to be correct. If your basis is on, like, historical evidence and precedents and other things, and not just some guy who you support through, like, Patreon and shit yelling into his, like, webcam. Like, you don't need these types, and these types are at least from some sort of, like, drive. If we're going to psychoanalyze again, their drive is self-interested in a different way. It could be through, like, vanity, or it could be through, like, the need to support themselves. And if it's vanity, then it's probably worse, because we can at least assume that these people are pretending to be a leftist in order to, like, survive. But if it's from vanity and from a vanity standpoint, then it's ridiculous, you know?
Yeah, what was it? And that's one of the examples of why we need to, like, we shouldn't just accept everything as what they say it is. Like, I'm a socialist, but then they will say, no, I don't. What was it? No, I liked my land. Well, let's pick an example, because that's another problem I'm seeing. Like, a lot of people say, oh, I hate cops, I hate landlords, and all of a sudden they don't talk about anything that actually goes around that. Those are very specific examples of rad libs, radical liberals sort of thing. They act like they're communists, but they're just liberals. And the example that were given is like, I had a good example. I thought. Okay, the Griff
What were you
left.
saying? What were you saying?
Okay, the Griff left. A lot of them. This goes a lot with debates. Okay, now I fully remember. A lot of them, they act like they always win. That's one of the main problems. Or they always, well, as only at like debates that will obviously seem like they're not know what they're talking about. If it's like, oh, I lost this because he made a threat against my family or something. Oh well. But like, one of those things is like they never act. Oh, they don't need to act like they lose. And if they don't act like they lose, their fans will only think they win, and that's one of the main problems. Like,
yes, the Ben Shapiro grift, I think is what you're talking about.
yeah, and this
the
goes,
they're
sound
trying to
smart but
adapt.
say nothing.
They're trying to adapt to. They're trying to adapt to those standards, and that's like the worst standard to adapt to. Because at the end of the day, Ben Shapiro is pretty mask off about the fact that he's doing this shit for money. So the synthesizing of this and acting in this sort of way that Ben Shapiro would, like, and continuing that tradition, except from like a left point of view, is it derives its whole entire motivation from wanting fucking money, dude. So
I mean, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, and one of the main problems is also like the view on ourselves on socialism. I mean, ourselves view what we view as socialism, because like people just say it's co-ops, or just say it's when government does something, or they say it's a certain type of way of people acting. It's all that stuff. It's not that. It's a very complex thing. That's one of the main things about it. And what is it? There's especially like those like
okay.
Don't
Continue.
censor yourself, Paul. Just say it.
Okay, yeah, Vosh. Okay. When we say these communes, like people say co-ops and whatever for socialism, that doesn't work. That's not what socialism is. Engels specifically says co-ops aren't socialism. And socialism has the definition has gotten off. And that's sometimes what, if you could define like things like a good anarcho-communist, a good ML, a good whatever, is by what they actually know of definitions and where they come from. Because people say socialism is when we are heading to. What was it? Example is like when ML says socialism. No, Marx says socialism is when we are in the transitionary period from. What was it? Like work vouchers, then we hit the communism. That's what not Marx said. That's what Lenin said. Marx interchangeably said communism or socialism and all that stuff. There wasn't a really big difference. Like that's when you can tell when someone actually knows what they're talking about. They know what they're talking about and can differentiate from like different people from saying it, sort of thing. Like was it Marx who said it? Was it Kropotkin? Was it Luxemburg? Was it Lenin? Was it anyone, sort of thing.
Yeah, and by the way, when I start my dictatorship, the proletariat, Paul is going to be my socialist proctor. He's going to be the one you're going to have to do your exams under to prove that you deserve your socialism card.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that like going to the? Is it gonna be like going to the DMV and taking a driving test, or?
No, it's going to be a lot more fun.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say I'm not really interested in socialism anymore, if that's the case.
Yes.
Anyways, yeah, I mean, it's a problem, and I think Paul brought up the concept of like purity testing, which I think has connotations in like a different realm, but for sure, like if this person is just online 24/7 and you think that that's doing something or generating something, I can tell you it's not a whole lot. In fact, a lot of it is kind of like well poisoning, because this person can talk a good game and then tell you like, oh, you need to get out and organize. But if you're seeing them on the screen 24/7 and you don't, and there's nothing really, because if they get off of their like YouTube stream or some shit and then they're back on Twitter, like in between that, and then they're like, okay, tonight I'm bored, I'm gonna stream some video games. Tell me what you. That person is not like putting whatever they're saying into action. They're being extremely hypocritical. And
okay, oh, that's a interesting dynamic that you put up though, because now you're saying that, like, you're asserting that we've gone from not helpful to now it's being harmful. Like, is that what you're saying?
I mean, in some ways it's harmful. As a whole, it's mostly unhelpful. There are some elements that are harmful, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that this is like there's like the perfect version of the worst of the grift left, because there's variations, like with anything. I mean, I'm not being
So
literal.
what's the difference? What's the difference between that middle ground of being neither helpful nor detrimental, and then it being detrimental? Like, what sets those two apart?
The detrimental, I think, would be relying on this person to be adequate in the representation of the left, and then the unhelpful is if they can't like parse out an ideology and like kind of like lead people astray into thinking that like this is okay, we need somebody like this. They're needing to like this whole entire like field of things, which is like adapting to Ben Shapiro type shit is good enough. Like, so like off the cuff, this is probably like they don't have like differences really in what I'm saying, but like really fully fleshed out, there are like definitive harmful shit, because unhelpful is like not like practicing what you preach, and harmful is actively thinking that continuing supporting like the DNC and their ability to just be like, well, we retract all support for your guy, and now it is your duty to vote for this guy, and then like using like harmful reasoning to come to that, even though this person's a piece of shit. Like, yeah, that's super harmful, because it muddies up like what leftists stand for, and a lot of it is kind of breaking down these institutions, because at the end of the day, they're fucking up like humanity, to be honest with you. So if I was to have to flesh this out in like writing, then yeah, it wouldn't sound like they both kind of like overlap. There would probably be major distinctive differences. But if you're having me shoot from the hip, it's going to be a bit opaque, but there's definitely elements that exist there. And not saying that like there's like what's it called? Like there's like distinctive differences, and there's like a distinct person that we can point this to, but there's definitely elements of these types that are out there, and it's like, should we really be caring about like confronting certain people on YouTube with like an opinion that's just totally just is like including yourself in a discussion with fucking Destiny really like that necessary? No, because we all know he's an asshole, you know? We all know he's a shitty guy, but people still do it, and it's like, are you doing it because it's entertainment? Are you doing it because it's helpful? Are you gonna parse this out? And then it's like, can our time be spent on something else, something different? You know what I mean? And don't rely on these types. Like, fine, if it's entertainment, fine, good. That's all well and good. But
I don't
this isn't
think we
like
know
leftism, dude.
I don't think we know what the stakes are yet, too, when it comes to this stuff. Because in current year, and in the recent past, like the majority of the electorate is not online, right? Like we're still not there yet. So this this corner of the internet is a very, very small portion of the total electorate at large, the total population at large. And so we don't know how much of an impact this kind of grifting has on the total results of the country.
I might just stop you there and say that just that base assertion is just saying that it's alluding to it being mostly irrelevant, which maybe it is, but it's still.
Well, I know. See that I was gonna flesh it out a little bit more than that. I think it's fair to say that it is irrelevant now, but that like these are seeds being planted, I guess, to use that analogy. Like,
yeah, because there are certainly
you won't
people
see the results for a while.
I would certainly say that there are people on YouTube that like deserve to be supported because their work is like excellent, and I won't drop names, but maybe I should.
I mean, you can. I have no.
I mean,
issue.
like Cook Philosophy. Cook Philosophy is great. Like he's great, and that's the side of YouTube that we should be wanting more of. Like he doesn't engage with like I guess he talks to people, but I haven't really seen him like engage in shitty debate. You know what I mean? Just like debate for the sake of itself. It's
Yeah.
He avoids that, and he does some really good like academic work, and so those are the types that we should want and we should need, not grifters, dude.
Yeah, and
Don't want grifters. Don't need grifters.
yeah,
I mean, they're not going away anytime soon, my guy. Unfortunately, and if anything else, it's going to get worse. It's going to be even more and more.
I mean, that's why we're bullying them on the cast right now, dude. That's why we're bullying them.
and that's one of the things, as you say, times will change, and like when like the day when most of the electorate will be online, they will be millennials or Gen X or something like that. We have to be prepared like to get there, and that's why we should like be more active in our local political spheres, like in now sort of thing. Like if you are like, people should like not just like, if do you think they can get Congress, good for you, but if can't, like try to get something more local, like even the city, and or you like neighborhoods to the city to then bigger, like because like they're all online, but before they actually gain power, better if we gain that power, because they're, you know, if we have that electorate power, the government power, like, you know, we'll be like way above them, all that stuff, and like and we won't be, and we know, and if we allow the young people to do this, you know, they will be pretty advanced for like online stuff already, because, you know, some people will be like too afraid to go online if like some people leave bad comments on their Twitter.
I don't know. I think I kind of disagree. I agree with your premise, but this is my curse, is that I always have to, I operate in reality, and I like to think I operate in reality, and I look at things pragmatically. And I think one of the critiques that you guys are making is
operate
that things
in your
like,
perception of reality.
Yes, sure. One of the main critiques that you guys have, and that you kind of apply the grifter label to, is the people that use their platforms as entertainment, right, as opposed to like actual just education on different subjects. And my problem with that is that if you ever want to grow the platform, the educational platform that you have, that's actually, you know, spouting good theory and whatnot, you have to be entertaining. Like, I'm sorry, that's just the world that we live in. There's a reason why these people get to the level of popularity that they are. It's not because they're very smart or they have very good ideas. It's because they're entertaining, and the reason, and the how you are entertaining tends to be a little bit griftery, at least by the standards that you
assumes
guys
that entertainment is like the highest value in something, which I think most people would understand within context, that if they're going into something and it's like academic in any way, there's going to be a sacrifice of entertainment.
Right, but see, that's the thing. That you're assuming people are out there looking for that, but they are not. I can assure you. This is we're starting to get into the argument that, again, I don't disagree with the logic here, but you're asking for something to change that's never going to change. And the argument is that things like sports can lead to fascism, right? I'm sure you guys have heard that argument before. That's like it's a fringy argument, but it's an argument I've heard from certain leftists. And the argument basically asserts that when you have things like organized sports or organized entertainment, or even religion for that matter, it distracts you from the reality of labor conditions or just material conditions in general, right? That's the argument. So if you have just a very strict if you assert that the solution to that is just a very strict platform of regulated education, on certain things, you're never gonna. I mean, that's just literally never gonna happen because nobody in their right mind is going to give up things like sports or video games or
Well,
just entertainment in general.
well,
Is my
that's the
point.
thing. It's like they're like in like when what is it? When crises happen in the world, a good example is the Great Depression. Like one of the industries that went really big during that time was theater, like movies and all that stuff, because there was nothing else to do and everything else was horrible, sort of thing. And it's not saying that like Russia never had movies. There was plenty of movies. It's just that they're being conscripted into war, and there were food. Food wasn't the best at that time. I think there was a big drought right before 1917, during or around that sort of thing that caused like food shortages. So there's people starving and all that stuff. So they couldn't just go to the movie theater and escape reality because you can't, like, while watching a movie you just don't not starve, sort of thing. What is it? But we don't have to be like a mindless, not mindless. We don't have to be dry paint, sort of thing. We don't have to be ultra boring to get an idea through. Like, and as soon as we say a word, doesn't mean we instantly, null our argument. Is that, we just need a better argument. Like, one of the things is, I saw a thing describing this, is that people think truth will instantly get people over, and that's what people think, like, oh, the people was strong, like, I wasn't telling the truth enough or something. That, like, that sentiment is not always right, sort of thing. Like, we won't tell you, we can't just tell people these are stealing your profits, these people are grifting and all that stuff, and people instantly believe us. We actually need a well-formed argument. Like, we can't just say our opinions and we expect them just to believe them instantly, sort of thing. So, like, it requires, I think there is we can work around sort of thing. Like, there's been many, like, big movements around the United States that weren't that entertaining or were entertaining and still good, and they got pretty big.
Like what though? Like give me an example.
What was it? If you want, just go from leftist or in general, because like.
I mean, either works for the sake of movements in general. The logic should follow.
First one I can remember was like Ross Perot or something. He wasn't a leftist or anything. He was
Ross Perot in
Perot.
Perot.
Yeah,
that was the '88 election or '92 election.
I think it was '92. It was Clinton won, and he got?
Yeah, it was '92.
Yeah, at some points he was getting higher than the main two candidates, like polling higher and all that stuff. But like he just did it by himself and all that stuff. So it's not like, or our thing is, perfect, sort of thing. Like our system that benefits the elites, doesn't do everyone else good, sort of thing. It's not impenetrable. It's not impossible. There is a way, sort of thing. And like there's been examples in the past of like just local labor movements like taking an effect on people. Like we got there was a bunch of them back in the late 1800s, sort of thing, and we have labor, like, May Day, Labor Day around the world. We don't celebrate that here, but that's the reason, because like May Day is actually celebrating our workers that died during strikes, the U.S. workers and all that stuff. We commemorate that, but the U.S. government didn't allow that, so they put our Labor Day, call it a different name. They gave it Labor Day the name and put it in like August? I'm not convinced. Yeah, and they.
Yeah, dude, America sucks.
September, yeah, and what was it? They will try, but like, and we mentioned earlier that the Labour Party in the UK are, purposely messed up Corbyn stuff. Like, it was, there were some other issues, like Brexit and all that stuff, that I think Corbyn could have dealt better, as in, like, maybe should pick, like, more of a Brexit or less of a Brexit, because he was too middle. He lost voters that way. But, like, as you like there will be people trying to take you down, like at different levels, and not saying who they are and all that stuff. And we let this happen. It's only gotta let us fail, because we've seen like a capitalist liberal will rather work with a fascist than a socialist that will actually succeed in something. Know what I mean? So they just once that argument went a little off, but
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. Gabe asked for it because Gabe needs like every interpretation to have some sort of like liberal or literal cognition behind it. So
Oh, nice Freudian slip there.
I mean, yeah. I mean, come on, like.
But okay, because that's
Except
again,
that your reality isn't this pragmatic like thing. It's just operating off of like assumptions, my boy.
I mean, it's operating based off. I mean, that's literally how everybody's perception works. But it's operating based off of how I view the world to work. Yes, and how I view the world to work is that people are not very easily moved. I'm talking specifically within the United States. People are not very.
So we need
easily moved.
grifters. So you're saying there's a use for grifters?
I am not saying there's a use for grifters. I'm saying that the way in which grifters get possible can be explained by people's inability to think critically and be very susceptible to like various forms of entertainment. And as such, that like strictly educational, purity tested people. Like I don't watch this Cook philosophy guy, but like I did see one of the videos that you guys sent to me at one point, and he comes off as very like boring. Like I'm sorry, like he just does. He's very much like an academic, right? Like that's what makes him good in your guys' eyes, is that he's very academic. He's very knowledgeable
That's because you
about the
got
subjects that he's talking
baby
about.
food for brains.
Okay, I mean, okay, let's assume that I do, right? Like that is the average American, but worse. I would say is the average American is even worse than what I am. So, like, how do you expect to gain notoriety and popularity to the point where it actually has a positive impact on the entire system when you can't even maintain my attention?
There's
right?
some entertaining, entertainment approach that we can reach, but
see, like we're thinking of just online. Like people, like we show like the Bernie campaign. You just can't have everyone. Like everyone, a lot of people online was going with Bernie, but that doesn't help on real life folks.
Exactly, that's my point.
But that's the thing. It's like if we actually work and like go into the local levels, and then like all of a sudden we have like a governor or a senator or a representative like actually spouting Marxist theory, then like who do they talk to? What are they doing? Like China and Mike all day sort of thing. They have like
okay. Well, then on that level, then do you guys think AOC is a Marxist?
No.
Nah, dude.
I'm not talking about the stuff that she says in Congress, or that she said since she's been in Congress. I'm asking you if you think that she personally is a Marxist.
No, I think that I don't. But I mean, it's not Marxism's. I wouldn't see, because my interpretation of Marxism is just it's like a tool. It's like a tool to analyze.
All right, fine.
Things.
Don't
like conflict
overthink
theory.
the question. You understand what I'm trying to say here. Don't overthink the question. I'm not asking.
Okay, all right.
I'm asking you if you think AOC is a quote a leftist. Then, like, she came out of DSA.
But DSA is Big Ten, dude, and they're always getting like nefarious characters who are really not socialists. They're just kind of rad libby. But I wouldn't necessarily say that she's a rad lib. I would say that at most she probably is a sock dem, but that's just by design, because that's just how the American system works. Like if you go any further left than sock dem,
I see. So like that's the point that I'm trying to get at here, is that even if you have like, let's say you get like a let's take it to an extreme. Let's say you somehow get an ML as governor of California or something. You don't think that person is going to immediately change their rhetoric as soon as they get into office, because they realize that you cannot just like willfully force your way through the system. That's not how it works. Like that's my point in all this.
That sounds like a problem with the system.
It is. I'm not saying that it's not.
But you worship it when you say that it's pragmatic to like operate within that.
Absolutely not. That is not worship. How is that worship? That's fucking
because
insanity.
You're still assuming that system is operating at a capacity that is worth still like keeping
No,
installed.
I am saying that is significant. You have way better chance of making people's lives better within that system than the alternative, because not because the alternative is worse, but because the alternative is not viable. That is my position.
But that's assuming that the system doesn't derive itself from fucking oppressive origins, which it does.
I'm
Well,
not
like, well,
denying
I
that.
think-
Again,
I think
you're
we're looking at too much of a lens of like like it's real to be like let's be honest here. It's got to be really hard with such a large population. But say we get like go to some ML gets like someone like friends everyone in a small populated state sort of thing. Like if and their governor or better be a senator representative since they always get since they're more likely to get the floor and everyone's there and will probably be recorded and everything. I can see possibly there because like what was it? We seen like farmers back in the day being like were the ones like the communists and all that stuff. Like rednecks, like were considered communists for a while. That's why they were called rednecks for a bit. Well, like origin, it's a little complicated, but like you know, I mean, like.
Wait, is that actually true?
Well, yeah, like.
That's the origin of that statement.
Yeah, that's
redneck.
where the term redneck came from.
I did not know that. That is fucking hilarious, actually.
Because you got baby food for brains.
Well, and that's one of their things that like we perceive people as like they're gonna stick to this, but like we actually need to work with everyone, sort of thing. Like we should work with the academic to these lower class people that would like vote for Trump or something. Like they're not impossible not to persuade. Like
I agree, but that's working within the system, which apparently, according to Brandon, is absolutely horrible, which we should never ever do.
Well, like, but that's the thing. It's like it's not like we have to concede to them. We
Yes.
have to like give argument of why they should be something else. And what was it? I talked to people that like would like vote for Trump, super reactionary, and then all of a sudden they're now like, you know, socialists or such and all that stuff. I seen all sorts of types of people become socialists, but it takes time. It takes argument ideals and like all that stuff. Like make sure, like when we're talking about the system, we're thinking like a game sort of thing. We don't let the people running the show. We don't let them make us play their game. We let them play our game, sort of thing. That's how you win these types of situations. Is that we take our time, sort of thing. It's like if you get like locked down with a population and all that stuff, you can say whatever you want and like just as long as you keep with your argument of what you told everyone and convince everyone. But that's like a very hard thing to do and which will take a lot of work. So it won't be just one guy changing everything. It will take an effort of a lot of people, which if we have enough people, enough motivation and all that stuff, we can get pretty far, I think. If you just need more coordinated.
I don't know. You guys are way more optimistic than I am. That's all I'll say. Way more fucking optimistic than I am. I'm not a risk taker. I guess that's just part of my personality. I've never been a risk taker. Like I'm looking at it. If you look at it through like the lens of like if you're playing a fucking video game or some shit, do you take like the relatively like let's say it's a 90% chance for a +5 boost, or do you take the 2% chance for a +100 boost? I would take the 90% every single fucking day of the week. Like I'm not a risk taker, and I guess that worms its way into my view of working within the system versus not working within the system. I don't know.
Yeah, and you use pixels that at the end of the day doesn't really have a major effect on quote unquote reality as an example. So I think it does kind of expose itself, right? Just a little bit.
What was it? Yeah, and that, like, we need, like, someone with a system to actually work through it. Like, we need to fix some issues. And, like, I believe, I'm the type of person that believes you just need a good few people to get together and do something, and something can actually work, sort of thing.
Right, which is why I brought up AOC, but then, like, you guys are saying that she's not good enough, or she's not a Marxist, or you don't think that she's a leftist, or whatever. But here's the thing, like,
I mean,
it's New York. New York is
yeah.
really lost, sort of thing.
Okay. Well, okay. My point is that like, if you guys don't think she's like left enough or good enough to enact change, whatever, right? Like her popularity ratings on a national scale is like 17% or something like that.
You know,
So if she's not good enough for you, then I don't know how it is that you think.
As we said, that's like the what was it? That's the media, as we talked about in the first episode. Is
I don't care what. No, Paul. I don't give a shit where like the reason for the phenomena is happening. I'm saying that the phenomena exist. Like you can explain to me why it's happening a million times over. If you can't fix the reason why it's happening, i.e., mass media, which again you're not going to do anytime soon, or ever even, then like it's not even worth discussing. Like,
we're treating her like she's like the perfect example.
This is anti-intellectualism. I'm canceling Gabe. He's canceled. He's being completely anti-intellectual and completely anti-academic about this.
Well, like the one of the things is like we're treating her that she's the best we got, and like we don't. It just takes time. Like it takes steps. It takes sort of thing. It's like what's it? Like one of the problems I have with her is she sometimes does slip too much way too often. Like she gets like economists wrong. She gets arguments perplexed and all that stuff. And that's why one of the things why sometimes you need to not gatekeep, but actually choose the better person, not the first person up sort of thing, because we get a situation like this. If a real leftist movement's got to be a perfect example, we'll start to exceed at a lot of things. We need to pick at something. Like, you know
who I just thought of? I remembered that who fits your level of purity testing is Carter Lee, which I know you guys both know who this is. The state Congress. Is he state? He's not state senator, right?
Oh no, the
state House member in Virginia, right?
Oh yeah, and he's what was it?
Is it Carter Lee or Lee Carter?
I think it's
Lee Carter.
Lee Carter, I'm pretty sure.
I know what you're talking about. I follow him on Twitter and all that stuff. And I like him.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure he is an ML, actually, by the way. I'm almost positive.
Maybe.
Ex-mil dudes tend to be
ML
if they decide to get into leftism, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure they've been exposed to fucking state power and they're just like, nope, don't want to tangle with that, through pacifistic means.
Yeah. Well, is it? But yeah, he's
an arm the left guy for sure.
Yeah, and that I feel like we need more of those type of people.
Well, yeah, I am too.
I think he's a good example of what we need right now. Actually, we shouldn't expect him just one guy be elected, then go on the House, gives an epic speech. Everyone's like,
yeah. No, I know, I understand that.
But
which is I'm assuming is our contention with AOC, because I think that we do regard her kind of as of the left because the media perceives her as of the left.
Oh my god, you are not. I just.
Oh no, that's
the left. The left.
Oh, that's one.
I'm saying super.
I 100%
radical leftist.
Well, no, I don't think she's a radical leftist.
That's what I'm saying. They perceive her as.
Well, I think
so
I
place her in
Well, not what do.
Soc Dem territory.
No, she's more than Soc Dem. She's 100% more than Soc Dem, dude. Because she hides her power level 150%. 150%. Because the system requires her to hide her power level. Or at least she assumes that she needs to hide her power level. That's why she cozies up to, she plays nice with Pelosi. She plays nice with, the Democratic Party as a whole.
Yeah, that's why she was streaming with Liz Warren.
Exactly. But she's trying to play the system. That's her approach to it. She's taking try to play within the system to make change or to shift people's opinions.
The problem is that you think that this is the only legitimate approach to it. That's your perception, is that it's the only legitimate approach. That's where we differ, is that we don't think it's the only legitimate approach. You are right.
That is where we differ. And
No, this is actually, Carr is the perfect example for this. He's not the one being targeted by the media. So if someone like him or he himself goes large, everyone's like, oh, this guy seems nice. He's not. He doesn't social.
Well, he's not nice. He's very abrasive on
that's
Twitter.
One of the things that I think should be more often. But he's oh, he's the guy that would get stuff done. Then the media is focusing on AOC, and like the left needs to stop like accepting like our position as choosing who is the head of everything, sort of thing. And that happens to like a lot in media. It's like, oh, this represents this other side of the argument, so I'll talk about them. Then everyone on that other side of the argument will actually go to that person instead of probably the better person, because the opposite side would just easily go to the best straw man in the argument, and like the opposition and all that stuff. So like Lee Carr would be the best example because he's not the one being targeted by media so much. And by the time this is perfect time for him to gain power and all that stuff, and like work around.
Right, but as soon as he does gain power, he gains notoriety, and once he gains notoriety, he's gonna gain the mass media and then get absolutely destroyed immediately. And because of the way that the electorate is, they're very susceptible to mass media still, specifically within the left wing. And I say left wing in quotes, in the Democratic Party. Like there's that graph again. I bring up that fucking graph of that I know you guys know which one I'm talking about. The trust in mass media, the Democrats versus Republicans, and how Trump got into power. Democrats as a whole trust mass media at like a 70% rate or something like that, extremely fucking high. So again, if
we're thinking differently on time. Like you assume like just like run for president or something, but like he can like inform his base or something. Like if you get like your state or province or wherever you're gonna be elected at, if you made everyone like you, there's nothing else they can do. You be there for like as long and be the example of like, hey, here, like he's doing this to these people and everyone there.
No, I understand.
Then, the person will still stay there and be like, you think you could trust him now, sort of thing.
I'm not as optimistic because I think that's what happened with Sanders. Because you look at Sanders and he had like everybody, like even Republicans would say like oh, he's a very, very trustworthy guy. I like him. He seems like a nice guy, and he still got destroyed by media. So like, I don't think that works.
Else. I don't think you have to play nice, sort of thing. You don't have because what was it?
Right, but the point is that they trusted him. That's the point, though. It's not the nice part. It's that they trusted him.
Well, like you don't need
tell
to
the
get
truth.
That trust. We're talking about like politicians from Washington. We're not talking about the public. Like they're different people. Like the Washington D.C. has a well-known image of like just everyone giving each other hand jobs and like taking coke in the back and all that stuff. It's like if people actually work on the streets and gets people support, what was it? I think it would work a lot differently, sort of thing. So
I kind of want to.
Yeah, we need to wrap up.
End on hand jobs. I think that'd be a good place to end on.
I don't know. It's the different worldviews are being exposed here. I'm a little bit nihilistic about this kind of stuff, about organizing in general, and and not because of like I think organizing is bad, but because of just like the stupidity of the average American, and it's not even their fault.
That's one of the things where you have to be cautious right there. Like a lot of people can work on. Sort of thing. We can't just view things on classes or, education level lens sort of thing. That's one little problem with those elitist liberals in California sort of thing. What is it? Like, here's the average Trump supporter and it shows like a shack with a Trump flag on it.
I didn't mean like literally stupid. I mean like lack of ability to think beyond like the grifter level of material,
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay. And I get that, but I think it's about that time, and maybe that's a subject that we can broach. We can start, like class and stuff in the next episode.
Yeah, so. I don't know. It's good too, though. It's good for us to have different opinions on this stuff because if we didn't, then this would be way more boring to listen to, probably. So
yeah. All right, Paul.
Something tells me I'm gonna be the one who gets the hate comments and not you guys. So,
okay.
Paul, can you play us some Guthrie?
What's it, Guthrie? Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, and what is it that today we are ending today's episode, and have a nice day.
There's a better
Adios.
world.
All right,
Don't
bye-bye.
you see? There's a better world that's coming. Don't you see? When we'll all be union and we'll all be free. There's a better world that's a-comin', don't you see? There's a better world a-comin', and don't you know, no, no. There's a better world that's a-comin', don't you know? I'm a union man in a union war, it's a union world I'm fighting for. There's a better world that's a-comin', don't you know? There's a better world that's a-comin', there's a better world that's a-comin', there's a better world that's a-comin', I'll tell you why, don't you see, and don't you know, no, no. Hey, 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 there's a better world that's a-comin', I'll tell you why, there's a better world that's a-comin', I'll tell you why. There's a better world that's a-comin', tell you why. Better world a-comin', tell you why. Out of marching, out of battling, you can hear the chains are rattling. There's a better world that's a-comin', I'll tell you why. Now there's a better world that's a-comin', and there's a better world that's a-comin', and there's a better world that's a-comin', I'll tell you why. There's a better world that's a-comin', and don't you see. Better world that's a-comin', and tell you see. Better world that's a-comin', and don't you see. Well, there's a better world that's a-comin', I'll tell you why. There's a better world that's a-comin', I'll tell you why. We'll beat 'em on the land, in the sea, and in the sky. There's a better world that's a-comin', I'll tell you why. Well, there's a better world that's a-comin', don't you see. Better world that's a-comin', don't you see. When we'll all be union and we'll all be free. There's a better world a-comin', don't you see. There's a better world a-comin', don't you see. Better world a-comin', don't you see. When we'll all be union and we'll all be free. There's a better world that's a-comin', don't you see.